I'm Jenna Langston, and I never imagined I'd get kicked out of my childhood home by the same man whose life I'd put on hold to save. But there I was, 30 years old, standing in the driveway barefoot, gripping a duffel bag I hadn't touched in years, while my father stood at the doorway of our massive red brick estate with his arms crossed like he was evicting a tenant, not his only daughter. The morning had started quiet, a humid Georgia silence hanging thick in the air. I was making coffee when he stepped into the kitchen with a sharpness in his step I hadn't seen since before his stroke. His voice was even sharper. "You can go now," he said, like it was a regular Tuesday. "You've done your part." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" I asked, still holding the coffee pot, still trying to understand the shift in his eyes. That's when he laid the papers on the counter. "Legal documents, transfer confirmations." I scanned the bold header, Robert Langston beneficiary. Amount $500, $1,000. "It's official," he said. "Your uncle's estate is mine now. $500 million. I'm free, and I don't need you anymore." I couldn't breathe. For 5 years, I'd taken care of him. Left my life in Austin, quit my design firm, moved back into the house I swore I'd never return to. I became his nurse, his housekeeper, his driver, his cook, his everything because he refused to let anyone else in. "I built this house with my bare hands," he used to say. "I don't want strangers wiping my mouth, so I did it. I wiped his mouth. I changed his bed sheets. I helped him bathe. I organized his medical bills, fought insurance companies, and made his house livable again. And he tossed me aside like it was nothing." "You're a grown woman," he said. "You'll land on your feet. Don't act like you're entitled to anything." Entitled. That word hit harder than the rest. I wasn't asking for anything. I never had. I just thought, maybe, that when the money came, he'd loosen up. Maybe we'd finally breathe again. Maybe I could go back to school, start my business over Have a Life. But in that moment, I realized he never saw me as a daughter. I was a convenience, a caregiver, a silent witness to his slow, bitter recovery. And now, with $500 million in the bank, he didn't need the silence anymore. He needed space. He needed power. And I was in the way. "Your room's already cleared," he added. "The cleaning crew will be here by noon. I left some cash by the door. That should get you a hotel for a few days." He didn't even look at me when he said it. Just turned and walked back into the living room like he hadn't just shattered the last thread holding us together. My hands were shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I signed nothing. I just took the duffel bag, walked out past the hedges I trimmed. Every Saturday, stepped onto the driveway. I pressure washed for his birthday and got in my car without looking back. He thought it was over. He thought money made him untouchable. But what he didn't know was that I knew something he didn't. Something that made his fortune far more fragile than he realized. And in less than 24 hours, he'd be on the phone, desperate, begging me to fix what he couldn't. And I'd have to decide if I even wanted to. I didn't have a plan when I drove away. No suitcase, no backup apartment, no secret savings account. Just a gas tank half full and a heart hollowed out by a man I had spent years trying to love the right way. I checked into a cheap roadside motel on the edge of town. The kind with flickering neon signs and a bedspread older than me. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again, cold, final, dismissive. "You'll land on your feet. Don't act like you're entitled." That word kept looping in my head, entitled, as if the 5 years I gave him had been some selfish act. As if quitting my job, selling my car, leaving my apartment, and saying goodbye to every client I had built from scratch was just me freeloading. I wasn't freeloading. I was sacrificing. When he had his stroke, the hospital called me not a sibling, not a spouse. Me. And I came. Not because he deserved it, but because I still believed blood meant something. That maybe somewhere deep down, he still saw me as his daughter. The girl who used to sit in his office and draw floor plans while he brokered land deals. The one who used to run errands for him just to hear him say, "Thanks, kid." But I had been wrong. Somewhere between his pride and his bank statements, he had replaced connection with control. It wasn't love he wanted. It was loyalty, obedience, silence. And when I stopped being silent when I started asking if I could take a night off or suggesting we hire outside help, he began to retreat. Bit by bit, piece by piece, he made it clear I was useful, not valuable. Replaceable. And now that he had $500 million, I wasn't even that. I remember once, maybe 2 years ago, asking if I could use part of the family trust to take a few online classes in business management. His response was so fast, so sharp, it cut me in half. "You don't need business skills, Jenna. You need to know your place." And I accepted it, swallowed it, because I was taught that good daughters don't talk back, that we give, we adapt, we smile through the disrespect, until eventually you start to believe that being ignored is normal. That crumbs are enough, that asking for more is betrayal. I think that's what hurt most. Not the money, not even the eviction, but the realization that for 5 years I wasn't seen, not really. I was background noise, necessary but not important, a placeholder until something better, something richer came along. And in my father's mind, that something better was power, influence, legacy. He didn't want a partner in that legacy. He wanted a mirror, someone who would reflect his greatness back at him, not on cue, and never challenge the image he'd built. I wasn't that mirror. I had started asking too many questions, pushing back, wondering out loud what would happen when he died. Who would carry on the business? What did he want his legacy to actually mean? He called those questions disrespectful, said I was fishing for inheritance. I wasn't. I was terrified. Terrified that I had given up my best years to help a man who would one day die and leave me with nothing but resentment. And now here I was, alone in a motel with peeling wallpaper proving his prophecy right. No money, no home, no career to fall back on, 30 years old and starting from zero. I pulled out my phone and opened the Photos app. There we were, me and him on his birthday last year, standing on the back deck I had designed and built myself. He was smiling, holding a bourbon glass, telling some story about the good old days. And I was standing beside him, eyes tired, smile forced, wondering how I had become invisible in my own life. That night in the motel, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let this be the end. I wouldn't let his version of my story be the final one. Because deep down, I knew something he didn't. Something critical. And if he thought discarding me was easy, he was about to find out how expensive that mistake would be. I wasn't always this jaded. There was a time when I thought my father was a giant. He used to walk into rooms like he owned the air and people respected him, no feared him. Robert Langston didn't raise his voice. He just raised his eyebrow and things got done. When I was a child, I worshipped him. He built his real estate empire from scratch, strip malls, gas stations, even the occasional residential flip. He called himself a blue-collar mogul and used to say, "Nothing in this life comes free, Jenna. You earn every breath." I thought it was wisdom. I thought he was teaching me strength. But what he was really teaching me was fear. Fear of falling short. Fear of stepping out of line. Fear of not being useful enough to be loved. My mother, Elaine, was the only softness in that house. She made the hard edges livable. But she died when I was 16, cancer fast and brutal, and the day we buried her, something else was buried with her, the last sliver of warmth in our home. After that, it was just me and him. And just me and him meant rules, unspoken ones. I wasn't allowed to date without approval. I wasn't allowed to travel unless it was for a purpose. Every decision, school job, even haircut was filtered through what he thought was smart. He never hit me. Not once. But he didn't need to. His silence was a weapon sharper than fists. Days would go by without a word if I disappointed him. One look of disapproval could shut me down for weeks. And when I tried to rebel just once by applying to an out-of-state art school, he called it a slap in the face. I stayed. I went to a local college, got a respectable degree in architecture, and worked jobs that didn't make him flinch. But I never felt seen. Not really. He didn't attend my graduation, said he was busy closing a deal. I believed him. That was the worst part. I always believed him, because it was easier to believe he was right than to admit the truth. My father only loved me when I was useful. And even that love came with expiration dates. When I told him I was moving to Austin to work for a design firm, he barely looked up from his paper. "Don't call asking for help when it falls apart," he said. It didn't fall apart. I built something good. Clients, referrals, a growing reputation. For a brief moment, I was my own person. Then the stroke came. I remember the voicemail, his voice weak and slurred, asking me to come home. Not please, just a directive. I didn't hesitate. I packed a bag, called the firm, told them I'd be back in a week. That week became 5 years. 5 years of being back under his roof, back under his rules. Only now I wasn't a teenager, I was a grown woman being treated like live-in help. I brushed it off, told myself he was old, sick, scared. But even in his weakest moments, he never once said thank you, never once admitted he needed me. And the more I gave, the more he expected. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted a servant. And I foolishly wanted a father. So I stayed, hoping, always hoping that the man I once adored would show back up, that maybe one day he'd look at me and say, "I see you, Jenna. I'm proud of you." That day never came. And yet even after everything, I still answered when he called me into the kitchen that morning, still looked him in the eye when he told me to leave, still stood there hoping idiotically that he didn't mean it. But he did. He meant every word, because to my father, family was conditional. Love was transactional, and daughters were disposable once the help was no longer needed. The cracks didn't appear overnight. They started small, quiet, like hairline fractures in a glass you keep using because you think it'll hold just a little longer. After I moved back in, things were manageable for a while. He was recovering from his stroke, and there was a vulnerability to him I'd never seen before. He needed help, dressing, needed someone to manage his meds, needed a ride to therapy 3 times a week. I was that person. I cooked his meals, cleaned his sheets, tracked every blood pressure reading in a notebook with timestamps and notes like a professional caregiver. He didn't thank me, but I didn't expect it. At first, I told myself I was doing the right thing. That's what good daughters did. But by month 6, I started to see it. The way he'd grunt instead of speak. The way he'd knock his cane against the floor when I took too long. The eye rolls when I reminded him to take his meds. "You're not a nurse, Jenna. Stop acting like you know everything." That was one of his favorites. He said it whenever I suggested we bring in someone to help. A home health aide, a cleaning service, anything. But every time he'd shut me down. "I'm not dying," he'd snap. "I don't need strangers in my house." He refused to let me have a life outside those walls. Anytime I stepped out to see a friend, go to the gym, even grab groceries, he'd call 5 minutes later, asking where something was. Once I stayed out too long and came home to find he had dragged himself across the floor to reach his phone charger, just so he could guilt me into coming back faster next time. He never said thank you. Just let the silence fill the space like a punishment. I wasn't allowed to date. The few times I tried, he made it miserable. One guy picked me up from the house, and my father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, drilling him like it was a background check. After that, the guy ghosted me. Another time, he accidentally called 3 times during a movie to ask where the remote was. I stopped trying. My world shrank to the size of his. My schedule revolved around his needs. My goals blurred into his routines. I lost touch with friends, turned down freelance gigs, canceled vacations. When I asked if I could start working remotely on the side, he told me I was getting distracted. "Focus on the house, Jenna. You can work when I'm gone." That sentence should have chilled me, but I'd heard worse. And by then, I was too numb to flinch. The financial control was worse. I had access to nothing, not the house, not his accounts, not even a shared debit card. He gave me cash once a week, enough for groceries, gas, and maybe one takeout meal if I budgeted carefully. I kept track of everything receipts in a shoebox. I lived like a dependent child in a house I used to know. Once I asked if I could get a car in my name again, just a used one, something to give me mobility. He laughed. "You barely leave the house. What do you need a car for?" What he meant was, I don't want you leaving. I don't want you free. He liked control disguised as care, and I had played into it for years. The turning point came 6 months before he got the inheritance. I found out he had quietly sold one of his old commercial properties, one that I'd helped him maintain listed and even staged for potential buyers. He made over $1 million on it, and I found out through a lawyer's email he forgot to delete. When I confronted him, his answer was simple. "That's my business. Don't go snooping through what doesn't concern you. I felt something break inside me that day. A line I didn't even know I had. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded and said, okay. But from that moment forward, I stopped trusting him. I started saving. Not money, I didn't have that luxury, but documents, emails, passwords, records. Quietly, carefully, I began gathering every piece of leverage I could find. Because deep down, I knew this wouldn't end in gratitude. It would end in war, and I needed to be ready. The morning it all shattered felt strangely ordinary. I had just finished making breakfast, his usual scrambled eggs, one slice of toast, half a grapefruit, and was setting the tray down in front of him when I noticed something different. He was dressed. Not just his usual robe and sweatpants, but a full suit. Crisp navy jacket, starched white shirt, polished shoes. The last time I saw him wear shoes inside the house was years ago. I opened my mouth to ask what was going on when he looked up and said, "It just like that, I won't be needing you here anymore." The fork in my hand clattered onto the floor. "Excuse me," I said, blinking, thinking maybe I'd misheard. "I'm moving forward, Jenna," he said. "My life's finally opening back up. Your uncle left me the whole damn estate, $500 million. It's official." He slid a folder across the table like he was offering a job contract. I opened it slowly, my hands cold. Legal language, asset breakdowns. A signature line with his name neatly printed beneath, and in the margin handwritten in his scratchy pen, the number $500,000. I stared at it. I didn't understand. I wasn't processing. "So, what does this mean?" I finally asked, heart in my throat. "It means you're free," he said, that slight smirk curling at his lips. "No more housework. No more meals. No more tiptoeing around my mood swings. You can go. Today." He stood, walked to the sideboard, and poured himself a glass of bourbon. 9 a.m. He didn't care. He was celebrating. "I've already arranged for the cleaning service to clear your room," he continued. "Toss or donate what you don't need. There's some cash in an envelope by the door. Should get you by until you figure out your next move." I felt my face flush hot and cold all at once. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, still hoping this was some cruel joke. "I'm letting you go," he corrected. "We both know this wasn't going to last forever." I stood frozen. 5 years of sacrifice. 5 years of wiping drool, lifting dead weight, checking meds, washing sheets, giving up my 20s, and this was how it ended. "Why now?" I asked, my voice low, raw. "Why? Like this." He took a sip of his drink and leaned against the counter like he was settling into a vacation home. "Because I don't need a nursemaid anymore. I need space. I have real plans now, projects, partnerships, big things. You don't fit into that. You're not built for it." That last sentence hit like a punch to the chest. You're not built for it. Not once did he ask what I wanted. Not once did he mention my life, my dreams, the years I put on pause. In his mind, I was a tool, one he had finally outgrown. "Take the envelope," he said. "Get a bus ticket. Go back to Austin or wherever. You'll land on your feet. You always do." The way he said it like I was some wandering stray. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw this bourbon glass across the room and watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces, but I didn't. I just stared at him, this man I once believed in, once tried to save, and realized he'd never seen me. Not really. Only what I could do for him. And now that I was no longer convenient, I was disposable. I picked up the folder, held it in my hands for a beat too long, then looked him in the eye and said, "Good luck." Then I walked out the front door, down the path I had swept every morning, past the hedges I had trimmed every weekend, and into the silence of a world that for the first time in 5 years felt like it actually belonged to me. He thought he had won, thought money had bought him freedom. But the thing about building your empire on control is this: when you cut out the only person holding the pieces together, it all comes crashing down faster than you can imagine. I didn't call him after I left. I didn't text. I didn't drive by the house or check in with the neighbors or wonder how he was doing. He had made his position crystal clear he was finished with me. What he didn't know, what he never took time to consider, was that the one person he just discarded like an empty coffee cup was the only person who understood how his new empire actually worked. Because I didn't just feed him and bathe him, I handled his documents, his estate, his emails. I'd sat through every meeting with lawyers and brokers, typed every memo, flagged every clause in contracts he was too tired or too proud to read. I knew the structure of the trust he'd just inherited. I knew it because I was the one who helped finalize the documentation. I'd filed the closing paperwork, forwarded final approvals, and uploaded the estate disbursement plan to his attorney's shared drive. I knew about the clause, the one tucked in page 43 of the original contract under a subheading called Conditional Disbursement for Legacy Funds. It stated clearly in black and white, in order to access the full $500 million, the beneficiary must complete a community impact project within the first 12 months. One that met very specific metrics: employment creation, property restoration, and verified social good. No project, no money. At least not more than the initial draw in advance of 2% or $10 million. And even that came with strings attached. My father had only gotten the notification of the full inheritance. He hadn't read the follow-up documents. He didn't know the entire sum wasn't liquid. He didn't know he needed a proposal submitted within 90 days, nor that it had to be approved by the board of the charitable trust managing the estate. And the board. They only communicated with me, because months earlier, at the request of my uncle, who never fully trusted my father, I'd been named project coordinator on all legacy-directed impact initiatives. My name was listed on every contact form. My email was the one receiving the updates. My login was the only one verified in their system. He never asked. He never cared enough to ask. He saw the number 500 million and assumed it was sitting there in some vault, waiting for him to grab a handful and start building whatever monument to himself he had in mind. He had no idea the entire fortune was hanging by a thread made of logistics compliance and red tape, and I was holding the scissors. It was almost laughable. For someone who prided himself on being in control, he had no idea how fragile his grip really was. And the part that made my blood run cold: if he had just treated me like a person, like a partner, like family, he never would have had to worry. I would have built the project for him. I would have drawn up the renderings, pitched it to the board, handled every inspection, every budget, every community meeting. It could have been easy, clean, legacy preserved. But now he'd need to come crawling back. And I had to decide how much of myself I was willing to give to a man who had shown me exactly how little I meant. I sat on the edge of the motel bed that night, laptop open, reviewing every document tied to the estate. Everything was still intact. My permissions, my roles, my records of every conversation with my uncle, every detail of the proposed project, a mixed-use space for housing mental health and job training in underserved neighborhoods. A vision I believed in. A vision my father had laughed at when I first mentioned it. Sounds like charity, he'd said. There's no profit in pity. I remembered those words now as I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the touchpad. He'd thrown me away, but he might still need me. And if he did, he would have to ask. Nicely. The call came at 9:12 a.m., 2 days after I walked out. I was sitting at a small cafe near the city library, nursing a bitter coffee I couldn't afford and pretending to browse apartment listings when his name lit up my screen. I stared at it for a long time. Let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. Then I waited. Less than 5 minutes later, it rang again. Same name, same number. I picked up. "Jenna," he said, voice low, strained. "We need to talk." I didn't answer right away. I just waited. He cleared his throat. "Something came up. There's something wrong with the account." I leaned back in my seat, heart steady. "What kind of wrong?" I asked, tone flat. "The rest of the money," he said. It's not accessible. They're saying something about a project about paperwork." "I don't—" He paused, like the words were sour in his mouth. "I don't know what they mean." I let the silence stretch. Then, "You didn't read the clause, did you?" He didn't reply. I smiled to myself. The legacy clause, page 43. You have 90 days to submit a project proposal. If it's not approved, you forfeit the bulk of the estate. It goes into a charitable reserve fund." He breathed heavily into the phone. "They won't talk to me," he said. "The lawyer said everything was routed through your contact info. They said you were named coordinator. Why didn't I know that?" "Because you never asked," I said. "Because when I told you about the project, you dismissed it. You said it was a waste of time." That was before he snapped, before I knew it was connected to the estate. "Exactly," I replied. "So now it matters." He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, "Can you help me?" It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. I let him stew in it a little longer before responding. "You want my help?" "Yes," he said. "You want me to save this for you." "I'm asking," he said quietly. "I need you." Those 3 words carried weight. Not because I needed to hear them, but because I knew how hard it was for him to say them. I stood, dropped a 5 on the table, and walked out of the cafe. "All right," I said. "Here's how this is going to go." I laid out the terms clearly, calmly. I would lead the project fully. I would handle the design, the team, the budget, the outreach. He would have no control, no override, no interference. He could be listed as a figurehead if he wanted a ceremonial nameplate on the building, but I was the one calling the shots. "That's not how I do business," he said sharply. "It is now," I replied, "because without me, you don't have a business." I sent him a contract that night when I'd already had drafted in advance. It gave me full operational authority and access to a discretionary fund to get started. He signed it the next morning. No revisions, no snide remarks. Just his signature hastily scribbled like he couldn't bear to read what he was agreeing to, and with that, the power shifted. Not just legally, but emotionally. He no longer held the upper hand. I did. I assembled a team: architects, community leaders, financial advisors. We began drafting blueprints, selecting locations, negotiating permits. Every call, every meeting, every decision ran through me. He was copied on emails, but I knew he didn't understand half of them. And for once, he didn't pretend to. He just watched from the sidelines as I did what he never believed I could do: build something real, not for money, not for control, but for people, for impact, for myself. I didn't ask for his praise. I didn't expect it. But deep down, I think he finally saw what I'd been trying to show him all along: who I really was when I wasn't being edited into silence. The unraveling came slowly and then all at once. At first, he hovered around the edges of the project like a ghost. He'd show up at planning meetings, sit in the back, offer unsolicited advice to people who didn't ask for it. I let him talk, let him puff his chest, but no one listened. They looked to me. I was the one with the answers. I was the one making it all happen. The contractors followed my timeline. The outreach team followed my messaging. The architects brought my sketches to life. Every time he tried to insert himself, it became more obvious how little he understood. He started to get frustrated. He'd pull me aside after meetings, whisper that he didn't like the paint choices, that the landscaping plan was too soft, that the media kit made him look like a side character. I didn't correct him. He was a side character. And he was finally starting to feel it. The board loved my progress reports. The community partners praised the transparency. Donations began trickling in from outside investors, impressed by the clarity of the vision. And through it all, he stewed. I saw it in his eyes, that gnawing realization that he had been wrong, that I wasn't a placeholder, that I was the engine, and that engine was running without him. The final blow came during a live press event. We had just broken ground on the first development site, a former strip mall we were converting into a multi-use center with transitional housing, mental health services, and job placement programs. Local news showed up. Cameras, microphones. The mayor even made an appearance. I stood at the podium, thanked our partners, and then without warning invited my father to say a few words. He looked startled, like he hadn't prepared anything, which he hadn't. Still, he walked up, adjusted the mic, and started to speak. "This project," he began, "is the culmination of my years in real estate and my commitment to this city." The words were flat, hollow, like someone trying to read off a teleprompter that wasn't there. He stumbled, repeated himself. used words like initiative and infrastructure, but never said people, never said community. When he stepped down, the applause was polite. Barely that. He avoided my eyes. Later that night, I found him in the temporary office we were using on site, hunched over in one of the rolling chairs, shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. "They don't respect me," he said. Not angry, not loud, just defeated. "They don't even know me." I sat down across from him, folded my hands, and said what he had never been able to say to me. "That's not their fault." He didn't respond, just stared at the floor. "You had a chance. I continued to build this with me, as equals, as family. But you chose control, and now you're on the outside looking in." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a tiny, barely there motion like even fighting back felt too heavy. In the weeks that followed, he faded even more, showed up less, spoke less. The press stopped asking for him. The board stopped copying him on emails. The project became mine in every visible way, and he, once the man who commanded rooms with a single glance, became a footnote, not because I erased him, but because he erased himself. By refusing to believe I could lead by discarding me when I was most loyal, he cost himself not just the money, but the legacy. And now he had to watch me create it anyway without his permission, without his control, and without needing him. The ribbon cutting happened on a bright spring morning, the kind where the air carries just enough breeze to feel like a reset. The main building was complete. Fresh paint sunlight bouncing off new glass windows, garden beds lined with native plants. The community center stood proud at the corner of the neighborhood that once felt forgotten. And I was proud too, not just of the building or the team or the donors we'd rallied. I was proud of myself, for not breaking, for not folding into the small, obedient version of me that had once lived in his house, tiptoeing through conversations, desperate for a nod of approval that never came. I stood at the podium, greeted by a crowd of volunteers, neighbors, officials, and media. I wore the same blazer I'd bought years ago for client pitches, the one I hadn't worn in half a decade. And when I looked out at the crowd, I saw faces filled with warmth, gratitude, respect, but not his. My father wasn't there. He hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't called. I hadn't expected him to. But just before the event started, I spotted him standing at the edge of the parking lot behind the crowd. No cameras, no spotlight. Just a man watching something he'd lost the right to claim. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to. This moment wasn't about him. It was about everything I'd reclaimed: my time, my talent, my dignity. After the speeches, after the applause, I stepped inside the center. The rooms were alive with color and promise. Classrooms, offices, lounges for mentoring programs. I paused at a wall near the entrance where we'd installed a donor plaque. My name was at the top, followed by the names of our key partners. His name was at the bottom in smaller font listed under initial seed contribution. That's all it was now, a seed. I had been the one to grow it. That afternoon, as the crowd thinned out and the staff settled into the rhythm of opening day, I walked outside and saw him still standing there. I approached him slowly. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. "It's incredible," he said. Not loud, not theatrical, just honest. "You did it." I nodded. "Yes, I did." He looked at me, then really looked. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was no challenge in his eyes, no ego, just a man standing in the shadow of something he didn't build. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but I always did." He looked down at the pavement, kicked at a pebble, like a boy caught misbehaving. "I was wrong." There was a long silence. I let it sit. I didn't owe him forgiveness, but I also didn't need to carry the weight of resentment anymore. "You were," I said, "but that's not my burden now." I walked away before he could respond, back toward the building, back toward the life I had shaped with my own hands. A life where I didn't need his validation, where I no longer chased applause from a man who had built his identity on silence and control. I had learned to speak, to lead, to build, and not just buildings, but something lasting, something that mattered. The center wasn't just a project, it was a symbol of everything I'd survived, of everything I'd become. I wasn't a daughter living in someone else's shadow anymore. I was my own legacy, and I finally believed it. People talk about legacy like it's a plaque on a wall or a name etched into a building, but I've learned that legacy isn't what you leave behind for people, it's what you build within them. For years, I believed my worth was tied to how well I served others, how quietly I carried burdens, how much I could endure without asking for anything in return. I thought that being a good daughter meant shrinking myself to fit into the version of me my father could tolerate. I thought love meant loyalty even when it hurt. But standing here now, watching families walk into a building I designed, seeing kids laugh in rooms that used to be filled with silence, I know better. I know that survival is not the same as living, that obedience is not the same as love, and that sometimes the only way to honor the people who raised you is to choose not to become them. My father hasn't changed much since the center opened. He still avoids hard conversations, still struggles to say things that matter. But he hasn't tried to take credit, hasn't demanded recognition. Maybe that's his way of apologizing. Or maybe he finally understands that power built on control is fragile, that if you strip people of their voice long enough, eventually they'll find a louder one without you. I don't hate him. Not anymore. That's another thing I've learned. Letting go isn't the same as letting someone back in. Forgiveness isn't about giving them peace. It's about giving yourself permission to move on. I've rebuilt my life, found a small apartment downtown with plants on the balcony and sun pouring through the windows every morning. I teach design part-time at a local college, mentor young women trying to find their way in a world that still tells them to be quiet, be small, be grateful even when they're being dismissed. And every month I come back to the center. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because walking through those halls reminds me of the version of me I almost lost. The one who used to believe she needed someone else's approval to matter. That version is gone now, and in her place stands a woman who knows her own value, who will never again wait for someone to hand her space at the table. She'll build the table herself, and if there's still no room, she'll make a new one entirely. If you're listening to this, if you've ever felt trapped in someone else's version of your life, know this. You don't have to stay small to keep the peace. You don't have to earn love by disappearing. You can say no. You can leave. You can build. And yes, it might be terrifying. Yes, you might walk away with nothing but a duffel bag and a name no one recognizes. But sometimes that's exactly what freedom looks like. Quiet, lonely, and absolutely worth it. I don't regret anything. Not the years I gave. Not the silence I endured, not the moment I walked away, because every step brought me closer to this, to peace, to purpose, to myself. And if breaking the cycle means being misunderstood, being called ungrateful, even being cut off, then so be it. I'd rather be alone in truth than loved for a lie. This is my story, not his, not anyone else's, and I'm finally living it on my own terms.